Orange Neuroverse Live, a session where we get a chance to speak with some of the experts in the field. And what better day today where I have a privilege to speak with Professor Sujata Bhan, someone who I really respect for two reasons. One, with her personality, that she is always available to speak with us, and we are doing some collaborative research. But second, she is going to speak about a topic which is very close to my heart, inclusive education. But before I start, I really have to tell you about Professor Bhan. Things that she has done in her career for over 3 decades is her experience in the field of teaching, administration, and research, all around special education and inclusive education. Professor Bhan is the editor of bi-monthly newsletter DSE Symphony, published by Department of Special Education, and she has convened many international and national conferences organized by the Department of Special Education. She has a PhD in special education, she has MPhil in psychology, as well as B.Ed in special education. And currently, Professor Bhan is the senior professor and head of the Department of Special Education and International Quality Assurance Cell Advisor at Chairperson of Board of Studies at SNDT Women's College. Professor Bhan, welcome to my show.
Thank you, Dr. Vinay. Thank you. It's a great privilege to be a part of this program. Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to really jump right in because I can't wait. I know I have word inclusive education. So why don't you just tell to our viewers again, because we have people from all stakeholders, what really is inclusive education and what it looks like, especially in India?
I'm glad you asked me that question because inclusive education means different things to different people. So I'm going to tell you how do we understand it in our country's scenario. Inclusive education in India focuses more on integrating children with diverse needs, like those with disabilities, learning difficulties, socioeconomic challenges, into regular schools rather than segregating them in special schools. Now, there is a difference. Now, here, all the students are not in the mainstream class throughout the day. Many schools mostly follow the resource room model in India, what you may call the pull-out and push-back model. This works well where there are enough special educators in a given school and they can meet the needs of all the students with disabilities. Now, another model that we follow is where we have special schools up to middle grade, where they provide necessary skills to the children and prepare them for inclusive education in the secondary stage. Now, this model works well, again, if the students are well equipped with those essential skills and can manage with little support in mainstream schools. We also have many government-aided schools which take children with disabilities. As per the law, they cannot deny them the admissions. But it's more, I would say, not a matter of choice, but by default, because there is little accommodation done for them by the mainstream teacher. Generally, we have an itinerant teacher, a special educator who visits this school maybe once in 15 days or so to provide the support to the child. But other than that, not much is being done with the child in the school. So you can say it's more like a physical inclusion, but the child doesn't have much engagement in the class activities. And this is prevalent more in areas where there are no special schools. So by default, they come into these regular mainstream schools. But having said this, a lot of initiatives are being taken by the government to change the education system so that no child is left behind. So, India is like a world in itself. It's huge, right. It's diverse. So we don't have just one set pattern or model across the country. So it's very contextual and different models are working in different parts of the country. Yeah.
That sounds like a really complicated way of delivering education to really everyone who needs it. So, like, there must be really specific barriers in providing this inclusive education. And how do people generally overcome them?
When you ask me about the barriers, there are plenty.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, first and foremost, I want to highlight this fact that, we have divided education into these two baskets. General education and special education. So the mainstream teachers lack the training to deal with the diversity in their class. General ed curriculum barely talks about disabilities and inclusive education. And special ed courses, they focus on single disability specialization. So a lot of capacity building programs are the need of the hour when you talk about the solution, right? See, if a student is trained in visual impairment, but in her class, she may have a student who has hearing impairment or learning disability. That's not her area of specialization. We still focus on that single disability specialization. So therefore, they need a lot of capacity building. Also, there are a lot of misconceptions about disabilities, particularly in our country. A lot of stigma and attitudinal barriers are prevalent. We still believe in the past life, the karma theory, and if a child is born with disability, we are paying for the sins, and the family, many a times, they don't want to do anything about it. They'll just pray that, we are paying for our past karma, so we can't do anything about it but to just bear it, kind of like just go with it. It's God's will. So they won't take any proactive steps to overcome this problem. And there is a lot of ostracization of families. And if there is an intersectionality of the vulnerable group, to give you an example, a girl child, as it is in our society, we still have a mindset of treating the girls less than the boys. We still celebrate it when you have a son rather than having a daughter. So if it's a girl with a disability coming from poor economic background and coming from a poor caste, the lower caste, like a Dalit, you can imagine the layers of discrimination. So that is another challenge that we face in our country, that intersectionality, which again, it's again awareness only, and education only that can be the solution to a problem like that.
Yeah, no, I think you said it totally right. Like in terms of education and awareness is the key, and there is never going to be enough, especially
Yeah.
for a country like Canada, where it is massive in terms of volume and the number of people we have. But I've traveled up with several countries and I've met professors and people who are specifically working in this field. But I think everyone agrees that there is never going to be enough of awareness. But would you want to comment something about the higher level policies to promote inclusive education? Like what can the organizational level something could be done as a policies?
As I said, there is definitely a change happening right now. We are actually, to be honest with you, at a very dynamic stage where the whole education system is kind of going through a revolutionary change, So the changing landscape of education system is what is happening right now in our country. Now, it all began when we had the Rights to Education Act, the RT Act in 2009, which made it compulsory and free education for all from the age of 6 to 14 years. And in 2012, they made an amendment to that, which was really very important because they put special focus on the girl child and children with disabilities. And then our Rights for Persons with Disability Act in 2016. That's another milestone act of India for the rehabilitation of persons with disabilities, because in 1995, when we had the Persons with Disability Act, it recognized only 7 disabilities. But RPWD Act recognizes 21 disabilities, including blood disorders, mental illness, specific learning disability, multiple disabilities, which were not part of the Act earlier. This act also emphasizes on inclusive education with reasonable accommodations in the system. So it is mandated now, you see. And it also talks about reservation of persons with disabilities in employment. So it's covering the entire gamut for the rehabilitation of persons with disabilities. And more recently, our new National Education Policy, what we call NEP 2020, the cornerstone of this policy is equitable and inclusive education. It talks about socially, economically disadvantaged groups, which includes students with disabilities. So we are looking at inclusion of all the marginalized community. And it's the first time a policy is talking about education of transgenders, which is again a big thing for us, So those coming from low socioeconomic backgrounds, religious minorities, first generation learners. And also, as you know, we have so many languages, so linguistic barriers are there. So based on the guidelines of NEP 2020, we now have a national curriculum framework for the foundational stage and for school education that has come recently in 2022 and 2023. So there also we see a change, a paradigm shift from earlier rote memorization, and now the focus is on holistic education and use of multidisciplinary curriculum, innovative methods of transaction of that curriculum, and also continuous evaluation. So this is the changing scenario. We can see the political will, and therefore many initiatives are taken both at the state level as well as the center level to transform the education system right now.
I can see the passion in which you are talking, and like the way you are explaining. As I said, like I'm following up the what's rules and things are happening, but just to hear from you, I can see the collective efforts everyone is doing, because as you rightly said, you are sitting at the level where it is the teacher training. You are sitting at the level where you are creating those generations of new generation of teachers, either a gen ed teacher or a special education teacher. One, it has to be somebody who is really have to do and make those change, and I can hear in your voice. So I'm going to change a gear a little bit, because I want to draw for my audience here today to learn from your special interest and work that you have done, and let us tell a little bit more about how inclusive education benefits a neurodiverse learner or a neurotypical student in a classroom setting. How do you see that happening?
Before I answer your question, I'm going to take a step backward. What you said earlier about the passion. Now, where does this passion come from?
Yes, please.
Fortunately, I have been part of many of these policy decisions.
Oh.
You know about NCRT. They are conducting a variety of capacity building programs for the mainstream teachers, and I have been lucky to be part of many of those programs. UGC, our the Universal University Grants Commission, that's the main governing body for education at higher level. They are also very serious about bringing in students with disabilities in higher education, because we see a lot of dropouts after school education. The percentage of students who come to higher education is very, very low. So gross enrollment ratio as it is low, and those with disabilities, it's even lower. So very important thing I want to mention here is that UGC is conducting access audits in all higher educational institutes. So what are they doing there? They want to check whether, and when we say access, it's not just about the physical access, it's also about social access, curriculum access, and I have been part of those access audits myself. So we see that, at all levels, right from school education to higher education, the change, the will, that inclusive education is the only answer. And how do we work together to make that happen is something that everybody is working on.
No,
Right.
I think that's a really important point, because I said, like, so I've been on a higher education side for last 15 years. And as I was a professor at Queen's, one thing that we always saw was that number of students who need support, because while they are into grade 8, so in my city in Kingston here, we know that up till grade 8, they have full support. As they are going from 9, 10, 11, 12, those supports, the direct support starts to lower down. And when they are going to university, their teachers are always asking them and preparing them to advocate for them. But as you go into the what we would call, and I'm going to do the air quotes here, real world, right?
Yes.
When they
Yes.
enter into the real world, they have to see, and the stigma and not even disclosing to their teachers that I have a challenge, because they know that it is not going to be benefit, or they don't even go to the university, so then they go to the college, or then they go to the trades college, or then they are still struggling, and we have seen the gaps what of their full potential that they have, that they could have earned that living, they are never able to earn that living as well. So there is that whole spectrum where do we intervene on the policy level, where do we intervene with the support level or equipment. And that's where, again, you know it, that Orange as a technology company, where we come in, we try to help people with the assessments at the right level, at the early assessments, at the university assessments, plus giving them tools to help them get into that. So no, that this is really useful in that conversation piece.
Yeah. Now, your actual question was, how does it benefit?
Right.
Again, I will say that for me, inclusive education is nothing spectacular. We have to demystify it, normalize it. It's just about good education. How the teacher teaches is good for all. And yes, it is essential for some. That is what we have to always
Absolutely.
remember, right? So, neurotypical students, particularly, should not have this feeling. And here in India, the parents of neurotypical children are very averse to having a neurodiverse student in the class. Oh, why is this child in the class of my son or daughter? They
Mhm.
are apprehensive that as if it's some contagious disease or something. So again, lack of awareness. But what we need to highlight here is that neurotypical students learn to understand and respect differences from a very young age. If we practice inclusive education right from the start, it kind of normalizes. It teaches them empathy, enhances their emotional intelligence, develops deeper compassion, patience. I mean, all kinds of virtues they will learn when you are seeing that there are people of diverse backgrounds, right? And they all, if they're given the required support, can shine like everybody else. And also, it's their right. Who are you to say that I'm better than you, right? Right from the beginning, if that kind of environment is created in the learning space, I think that kind of paves the way for an inclusive society in the long run, right? And the teachers have to set up like a role model. They have to use, nowadays we talk about universal design for learning, which is again useful for everybody in the class. When you kind of put one child in a different basket, you look at him in a different lens, you do things differently for him, and that too in a segregated setting. Again, all the eyeballs are on him. So he doesn't feel that he belongs there. And he's very conscious of that fact. And as they go in higher classes, young, adolescents, they don't like to be treated differently. They want that anonymity like their peers. So it's important that the teacher, she uses the inclusive pedagogies without targeting this child who has some extra support needs. And it helps children develop, again, I would say, resilience, adaptability. But looking at the neurodivergent students, I feel it's evidence based that for
Mhm.
any child with any disability or coming from marginalized section of the society, inclusive education works better. It is evidence based. One, it's their right. Plus, they learn to cope without feeling inferior. Segregation and isolation, as I said, is not good for anybody. They feel inferior. So, when every student feels that he's being seen, he's being heard, he's valued, that motivates him, to push his boundaries and maximize his potential with the right support. So, inclusive education, I would say, works well for both the neurotypical as well as the neurodivergent students, provided the environment is created in that fashion.
Yeah, no, I think, and when we start to talk about environment now, then in a classroom, there are two main people. There's a student and there's a teacher. So in this sense, how is our pre-service or in-service teacher training can be changed, or how it contributes for inclusive education in that sense?
Again, it's a very important question because till now, till recent times, I would say, inclusive education was an alien concept. Now, there used to be a paper on inclusive education in the general BEd teacher training program, which was an optional paper. And I travel a lot across the country and I would visit different BEd colleges, general BEd colleges, and I would ask them, how many of you have opted for inclusive education? And hardly one hand would raise. They would be more interested in counseling because the schools were hiring counselors and not uh, people who had done something, some specialization in inclusive education. But since 2015, there is a change. Now, inclusive education is a compulsory paper. All graduate programs of teacher training include this paper. For example, UDL, that has become an integral part of curriculum. Internships are done in inclusive schools. Both theoretical as well as practical inputs are given for all teachers to understand the concept of inclusion. Continuous training is arranged to empower teachers to manage diversity in their classrooms for the in-service teachers.
Mhm.
Another very significant change that is happening now from this year, 4-year integrated programs have started now. These are called Integrated Special and Inclusive Teacher Education Program and Integrated Teacher Education Program, ITEP and EasyTEP, which is done after 12th grade. So the student gets a dual degree, either BA BEd, BSc BEd, or BCom BEd, both in general education and special education. As I said in the beginning, we still are having these two parallel streams.
Right.
I wonder if there will be any day when the two will merge. But having said that, at least having this integrated programs, there is more input on school teaching subjects as well as on inclusive education. So I think the teacher, now this has started just this year. So we are anticipating that the teachers in next 4 years, the first batch that comes out, will be more equipped to deal with diversities in their class. So that is something significant and promising, I would say, at this point of time for teacher training programs. Yeah. So, and for service continuous, NCRT and other organizations are constantly having in-service teacher training programs.
The professional, like the regular professional development, like what we talk about in the medical education. So like if you are a physician, if you are a professional, you have to take those ones. I have heard about psychologists or counselors taking those ones, but actually for teachers also, because the trends are changing, the courses are changing. I remember, as I'm a trained biochemist, 2000, there were concepts of things were there because every few years the new discovery is happening because the textbook was saying. So a professor will say, here is a textbook, but as you learn from the research and the evidences, the collective work that the groups are doing, if they are trained, here is the evidence. If you look at these concepts differently and how you function slightly differently, you have a. So I'm hearing that a strong professional development program really regularly for all teachers would be useful in that sense. So how do you see different stakeholders collaborating, or what are different these stakeholders who need to collaborate together to really support inclusive education?
First and foremost thing, I think one needs to understand that inclusion is not a destination, right? It's a process. So unless the various stakeholders believe in it, it's not going to work. To give you an example, a parent of a special child many a times is not willing to put that child in a mainstream school because they feel that the teachers there are not equipped to address the needs of my child. He will be better off because he will not be bullied. He will feel just like everybody is like him. So he will have more sense of belonging in a special school. So we have to work at that level also. The management does not want to make any changes, make any accommodations. They're so rigid. Therapists or special educators or mainstream teachers, everybody is working in their silos. They don't want to come together and work together to help this one child. So collaboration, I feel, is the answer for inclusive education to work, right? So it paves the way, where everybody comes together, they assess the child, and then they create, for example, an IEP, right? And then everybody puts down that what is the role of the therapist, what is the role of a special educator, and how will the classroom teacher use what is being done or created by the special teacher in the classroom, right? And parents also are very important, integral part of that because they also need to follow the same thing back at home. Otherwise, the child is going to, get mixed instructions from different people, right? So I feel, and again, important stakeholder is the political will, the policies, the government. They have to make sure. In our country, I would say, we have number of policies and schemes which are really very beautiful, but implementation of those policies, monitoring mechanism that the child is getting what is his right. So that again is very important. So I feel the teachers and the educational leadership, they have to be flexible, willing to make the accommodations so that they actually embrace diversity. And coming to the community, they also have to understand the differences and not stigmatize disability. Ultimately, the child has to go back to the community. Once he's out of school, he's going to look for employment. But if the community is not ready to make those accommodations and accept this individual, the education is a waste. So the community also has to be sensitized And they need to know that a lot can be done by each and every individual with disability in, up to their level, but provided we give them that kind of right support. So yeah, I think all along, the therapists, parents, school management, teachers, they all, when they work in the same direction with the same intent of supporting this child, chances of success are much more. So I would say collaboration is the key for success in inclusive education.
And I hear you, Dr. Bhan, and I think I'm going to do a shameless plug here. There are technology companies like us who have to be taken as a one of the pillar for the collaboration as well, because there is a lot of innovation. So, for example, AI is coming up in part, or the new technologies are coming up. Someone like us, Orange Neurosciences, where we use AI, we use develop these really easy to use scalable assessment systems, because now to have an inclusive classroom, or let's call it a personalized education, we went from a personalized medicine to personalized education, because in a classroom someone may not be a typical neurodiverse, but you still have a different learning pattern, right? And if we are talking about inclusive education and we are taking away barrier for all of those people, then we have to understand or give tools to teachers to understand what is the strength and weakness for the entire classroom without worrying about their work. And that's where definitely we are the one, but I'm aware that there are several people who are working on pedagogical needs for an inclusive classroom thing. How can we assess better, or how can we provide the tools for those people to come in and help together? So count us in your journey and trying to create a stronger community for a
Yeah,
successful
yeah,
IE
yeah.
in this
That's
case.
right. See, you know that in India there is this huge digital boom right now, and education is definitely affected by it. So digital tools and cognitive technologies, they are transforming classrooms in a very powerful way, reshaping how the students learn, how teachers teach, and how schools operate. We have so many AI-powered platforms, and I think I have seen myself a lot of students with visual impairment benefiting a great deal with
Absolutely.
technology. The only hitch that I have, maybe it's personal, I feel, in our country, the cost element is still
Absolutely.
a lot. That kind of brings in that divide. Even if the resources are there, but
I
the
think the affordability is
cost,
absolutely
yeah,
going to be
that
key,
is
because
one of
when
the
we
key.
make certain things, so, and again, I'll stay away from our conversation for the orange. But for us, even though we are a Canadian company in Ontario here, we built for a population in India. We knew where the pain points were. So the affordability and the scalability, like a low bandwidth, even though we have internet, it's not same high speed internet. We say in rural India we have internet reach there, but you cannot run everything. So developing something that is easy, affordable, and those ones. But so I want to round this up our conversation today. I know we wanted to talk about changing landscape in India, and I really wanted to take your perspective. And so, with your permission, I added beyond only because I wanted to hear from your perspective. What are the global challenges for IE?
Again, I'll share with you that I've had multiple experiences talking to professors, teachers from various developed nations as well, and developing nations as well. And on various platforms, I've realized that the concerns are quite global, quite universal. There is not much difference. One difference that I can see here is that the advent of technology, use of technology, which is so much more in the developed nations, which is not as much as in India, as I said, mainly because of one, the affordability, and secondly, availability and the knowledge of how to use it. But what I have seen is that many teachers are not adequately trained to handle diverse needs across the nations, not just in India. And special education skills, inclusive pedagogy, classroom management skills are still missing in many teacher education programs. In developing nations, one of the major concerns, like I've been to Bhutan, Nepal, Malaysia for that matter, schools are not physically accessible. There aren't enough schools which have ramps and elevators and accessible toilets, safe learning space. Similarly, as I said, assistive technologies are unaffordable and not many times even available. So inclusive education requires additional resources, but there is, the budget are restricted in many nations and funding is often inconsistent. So that problem also I see globally in many developing nations, which may not be there in the developed nations. Even the curricula are not always flexible or inclusive of different learning styles. Most of the places, as you move in higher classes, it's still the rigid paper pencil kind of a test. So when we talk about different evaluation formats, they stay on paper. They're not really that flexible in many, many places. And stigma and misconceptions are not just with India. They're with many African countries. I recently had a conversation with some professors from Africa, and they were voicing the same identical concerns like ours, And uh, even the inclusive policies exist in many nations, but as I said, monitoring mechanism or implementation of those policies, lack of accountability, that also I have seen and heard from different people from different countries. In fact, in some countries, inclusive education is still not seen as a legal right. So that way, we are still far superior, at least on paper. We say it's a fundamental right, but in many countries, it's still not seen as legal right. And where in countries we have migrant population, refugee population, children coming. So there we see they're particularly more vulnerable and often excluded from education system. Even where we have wars, natural disasters, they further marginalize, these children get further marginalized who are at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Another important thing is, again, in India also, it's one of the major concerns that we have insufficient disaggregation data on children with disabilities or those coming from marginalized identities. And that becomes a big deterrent because we don't have the accurate data. So it's hard to plan, hard to budget or advocate effectively. So that's again one area where we need to work on. And this again, as I said, I have not seen just in India, but in other nations as well. So I feel many concerns are very universal, and the only way of going about them is more and more awareness. As you said, it's never enough, but we have to take it all on together. Meaning simultaneously, like I can't wait. First, let me train my teachers, and then I will bring the students in the class. It can't work that way. Like you have to jump into the swimming pool and you have to learn to swim, right? So that is what it is. We have to work on different directions, different areas all together, whether it's in India or is it in many other nations who are also trying to make inclusive education in the true sense of it, not just a rhetoric, not just on paper, not just in policies, but actually in the classrooms. We see that every single child, no matter what his or her background is engaged, is meaningfully engaged, and is showing learning outcomes like everybody else. And there is no short change of, in education, in the quality of education that we provide to that child. Yeah.
Prabhan, this dialogue is so insightful. I can't tell you that how enriching this conversation is and so many thoughts. But I know we are at the top of the hour and it has rarely happened I've gone over time. But I didn't want to even stop you because what you are telling me is so useful, Rective. Count us in. We would love to continue our conversation. But for today's All Neuroverse live session, I want to thank you personally and on behalf of my entire team for giving us the opportunity to hear you. And we look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you very much. Namaste. And I'm really glad that we had a good conversation and we'll keep it going. These conversations are important, right?
Absolutely.